All right, so as I said, we've got a huge white paper we've put together for you that we'll distribute to all attendees, no problem. Upon request, we'll give you the email for that. I guess we'll get started, everybody. So officially welcome to our little State of the Nation for accountants and advisors and the SME community, which we think is incredibly important for the accounting industry to play a leadership role, both not just an opportunity, but a necessity at this point in time, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So the State of the Nation, as we know, if I share with you just a quick overview, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go into something that I suspect most accountants have been into themselves globally, which is to do with the World Health and the heat map of what's going on. And there's some interesting links. If you haven't seen these links, I'll make sure, or you haven't had access to them, by all means, we'll add them automatically to the report, okay? So what's interesting is we're getting some really factual data out of traditional media as well. There's some basic stuff out there in the press, as you can see. There's actually, I believe, a fourth case, a fourth death in the last 24 hours. So some interesting commentary there. But as I said, the heat map is something that's altogether different. What we're learning from the heat map is that we're finding that those countries that were caught by surprise, the death toll relative to the total number of infections is it's like 15 times higher than the countries that have come in a bit more aware. All right, so I'll come back to that and just give you those references and show to your client bases. But what's fascinating is if you look down into the top middle of the grid here. So if you look at China, Italy, Iran, and South Korea and Spain, you can see where countries that didn't see this coming have been smashed and the death toll is very high because they've had to respond late. Whereas what's happening that's amazing is in places like Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, Denmark, with the exception of the Netherlands, the statistics on the mortality rate are dramatically better, infinitely better, where these countries have seen the devastation ahead of them and have effectively been forewarned. And this is what we as an accounting community across Australia have got to get out to the SME community, is that the short-term pain for long-term gain is being affected right now. Is that what we're actually doing is we're looking to follow in the footsteps of a place like Denmark or Austria, where we've got, zero or almost no death rate whatsoever, only one at the most. Germany's in a similar boat. Very high infection, but only less than 10 deaths. So look at France on the other hand. France didn't see it coming, right? So the quicker the country takes the action that we are starting to take, the more likely that our grandmothers and grandfathers are not going to die in Australia. And I think that's really important. And those that are really, also at risk in terms of their actual health rate. Now, back to the agenda as well. I want to keep moving through it. And the lessons learned from other countries. All right, I'm going to go through this with you now. And what other countries have... Okay, by the way, if you don't have audio at your end and you can't fix that today for some reason, do not worry. We will distribute the entire recording to you upon request. You'll simply email us asking for that recording from today as well. All right. So what other countries have done well? Here we go. So Taiwan. Taiwan has implemented mandatory human screenings upon arriving into Taiwan and later put in place travel restrictions on passengers. with a 2-week quarantine. Australia has only woken up to the 2-week quarantine as of midnight last night. Can you believe it? Which is amazing. Taiwan started testing other symptoms that could be linked or the same as COVID-19, such as influenza or pneumonia cases, and tracked down everyone that had been in contact with that exposure. They've also even communicated that if you're showing the slightest symptoms, go and see a doctor, do not go to school and do not go to work. So Taiwan were onto that right away. Testing there is free, it's government paid for and subsidised, and also all hospital bills for residents as well of that country, suspected or confirmed, they have no fees, all right? So things like that are going well. Businesses have either shut or asked employees to work from home. I'm going to come back to that, particularly for the accounting profession, because I think we can lead by example and not have a mass panic in that regard. And all professional services can just take a chill pill in that regard as well, right? So what's interesting, schools have remained closed through to Easter over there in Taiwan, and government's banned manufacturers exporting particular goods. There's a masks rationing system for all respiratory masks, and they're setting them at a very low price. So what they're doing is they're also controlling the price of those health relevant products, and so that there's no cartel or capitalisation of taking advantage of the local people. Their government has communicated very clearly, and they're educating the public on how the virus is spread. They're making a huge effort to drive that communication every single day. In Italy, of course, what's interesting is that only food shops, pharmacies and newsstands are in fact open, right? Public gatherings are banned altogether banned in Italy. The police will stop people and ask what they're doing if they're out in public. They've got to have an affidavit to state their purpose, either working as employed or by a company, for a company, or shopping, health and emergency. People are not out for any specific reason that's got a relative affidavit, are either fined or could face jail. So that behaviour is to stem the tide, of course, which is overwhelming and quite tragic over in Italy. So China have banned the use of private cars. They've forbidden you to leave your residence without permission, again. Hospitals are relying on scooters and motorcycles for the delivery of food and other necessities. So they're shutting down behaviour to a one-to-one type of action, right? So let's look, I want to now move into what that means for us. Hopefully we are going to take enough action, but I do think that we need to understand what the pharmacy world is talking about through my sources. So my sources are saying that within the pharmacy network, they are acknowledging that there could be as high as a 60% infection rate before the end of the calendar year in Australia, right? And that's the stuff that the government do not want 90% of the population to understand or to fear, right? In terms of a frenzy. This is very, very important for us as an accounting profession. And for those of you that are business owners that have jumped on here today, it's very important to understand that we are talking about a new superbug. This is a common cold that actually kills. It's a common cold that kills, right? So it doesn't kill everybody, but it kills the weak, the elderly, those that don't have good immune systems. So what we really don't want to see is we don't want to see a 60% infection rate in Australia. And that's why some of the dramatic steps have been taken at the last minute, like the Grand Prix and so forth. But it's very, very important that we understand the implications for small business and how we can mitigate those as much as possible and lead our own local communities as accountants and business owners, and lead our local communities as much as we can to try and avoid some mass hysteria, okay? So let's walk through some of this, right? So our take on this is pretty interesting. We've got a team in my core office here of 6, and sometimes 7. we have no intention at this point of working from home. However, one of our employees last week woke up with a sore throat middle of the week last week. She let us know at 7 a.m. We encouraged her to stay home until that subsided. She worked from home for 2 days. It's as simple as that, right? We're a small team. Friday night's instructions to our team here were to avoid high density environments all weekend. So don't get out into high density public environments. If you're going to go to a restaurant, go to an open air restaurant. Don't go to a restaurant that's got very tightly held seating, you know, because they're jamming you in like sardines. Okay. I personally went to an open air restaurant Friday night and Sunday morning, and, you know, and sure enough, there wasn't much of a crowd there. So what the world suddenly looks like for small business, I want you to understand this, right? Small business is about 9.6% of the population in Australia and also essentially worldwide. So small business owners are suddenly more lonely, more anxious and more panic-stricken than perhaps ever before. Of the population that runs small business, 90% of small business literally trade week to week, month to month with no cash reserves. No cash buffer. They literally trade on the cash flow cliff edge, right? So the pressure on small business owners is suddenly quite extreme. What they are doing is, if they've got families, they've got a huge amount of pressure on them to stockpile their cash and go out and follow in the mass hysteria in the supermarkets, right? It's an absolute. The truth is, it's a real slight on our government that we didn't a month ago or even 2 weeks ago insist on restricted shopping, which is finally starting to come out now. It's just absolutely ridiculous. It's taken so long. The other thing that we need to think about, obviously, is a policy to get the elderly people, for example, age groups, to go in and shop, you know, at a set time of the day between like 10 and 12 and have different age groups getting in at different times, again, to create some order, right? And access for people too. I saw some moron buying 3 litres of freaking, you know, hand sanitizer, and you know, he started a frenzy on a Saturday afternoon. I was out studying consumer behaviour all weekend. So what's interesting for SMEs is that they're not prepared for the cash flow cliff edge that may be in front of them. And we need to reduce their anxiety, and we need to give them some guidance on how to innovate and reduce stress. It's going to be very important, right? We've got some tips for business owners. I'm going to walk through those now. And remember, I'm promising you that we've got a full white paper that we're going to share with you. We'll also, over the next 4 or 5 days, we'll have a Google Drive and a SharePoint on Office 365 version of this. So as we add to it and update it, we will also let you know, and you will get a notification. So if you want an up-to-date version, you'll be able to download that progressively through the week, if that makes sense, as we keep adding more content. Okay, so the first tip in terms of working from home, email, Zoom, video conferencing software, Skype, FaceTime. There are terrific resources out there. For anyone, if you've got any symptoms, of course, the smart thing to do with anyone that appears to have a common cold momentarily, as our winter, you know, as our weather starts to change, of course, coming off the Melbourne summer, of course, the Australian summer, cooler air at night. We want to send people. We want to send people out and working remotely if they're a little bit unwell. In terms of shifting strategies. So I think what's really interesting, I'm going to give you an example. We've got some events, some marketing events. I was scheduled to fly right up and down the East Coast this week. I've paid for flights, I've paid for accommodation, and I've paid for workshop venues as well. We'll be contacting all of those people that are involved in those events. We'll be running those online this week. I'm not concerned about myself. I can wear a mask and wash my hands at the other end of a flight. That's not a big deal. I simply want to lead by example, right? And what's really interesting, you already know the sentiment of those of you that are accountants. You can imagine the sentiment of accountants as a profession. We already mitigate risk for a living. There's a 5-partner firm that's actually postponed a meeting with myself for, you know, it was a strategic meeting. you know, that's fascinating that they've got that mindset, but it just shows you they're doing that when it's a drive across town in Melbourne. You know, what are your clients thinking? Okay. So in terms of social media, now there's never been a better time to get familiar with Zoom video conferencing software, Skype, and your use of social media. There's never been a better time to cut a personalized video from you or each of your dedicated client managers that have a parcel of clients that they personally manage. There's never been a better time to cut a simple video, or if you want, you can receive access to our stuff. We're putting a lot of content out that'll calm the waters and give some very clear instruction to particularly small business owners that may be, you know, quite anxious at this point in time. The reality is today, a small business owner can still, a tradie can go out on site, go and meet a client one-on-one. They don't have to shake hands. They don't have to hug and kiss and exchange germs. They can literally go out and spec a job, write up a quote and win a new client. 7 a.m. in here this morning for a 2.5-hour meeting with one of Australia's power brokers in the financial planning industry, national organisation. We had a small meeting in here this morning, business as usual, right? So you can still do business as usual if we can reduce the anxiety. The reality is to think a little differently. So for example, social media, you've got to get anyone in food services, anyone that runs a retail business, anyone that's got a cafe, a restaurant or a shop front, they have to start innovating. They have to start thinking about how they're going to get their messages across that they are still open for business in safe and effective ways. So for example, home delivery for a restaurant, a special on a particular dessert tomorrow night, get it out on social media. Make Uber Eats their next best friend, right? Innovate and find the home delivery services that have exploded and gone national, and some of them global, that can instantly monetize all of that food that they've got and all the produce they've got in the restaurant. The other reason why I'm not traveling this week is because if you think about any historical event such as wartime or any other crisis, you want to create inside your small business, you want to create a mission control. So you want to be as close to your most leverageable assets for as long per day as possible, such as your team. So the team members are the most valuable assets to any small business owner. So the last thing we want to do is disassociate ourselves from our own leverage. Getting involved with the team. You know, my team have produced an enormous amount of content in preparation for today, as you'll soon see when we provide that to you after today's session. And so you want to leverage a mission control. You want to establish one. You want to explain that to your team. You want to have micro meetings, you know, 3, 4, 5 times a day, which are very short and sharp. And you want to get them helping you to communicate with your clients. Now, this is also important for your clients as well. You want them to actually model what you're doing. You want to lead by example. You want to explain this to them as well, right? So if they are employer-based organisations, they have a few issues to think about, right, which we're going to talk about. In Wuhan, the cosmetics company Lin Quizon closed 40% of its stores, but the brand's 100 plus beauty advisors went online. So they took the digital platforms like WeChat and Snapchat, right, to engage all their customers virtually. So they literally transformed how to trade and kept going, right? Apple Computer Company announced in the last 48 hours that they've closed every store worldwide for 30 days, except for the stores in China. Why not in China? They've already closed them in China for 30 days. They're now reopening them. So Apple is a great example to small business owners. We all know what an iPhone and an iPad are, and we've got great admiration for their ability to become a very, very valuable business. So Apple are taking a hit commercially on their own cash flow, on their own ability to sell product for the next 30 days around the world. That'll be probably $1 billion off the bottom line, but they're doing so to stop the flood of interest of consumers walking into retail shopping centres in a mass environment. So they're not only looking after their own employees, they're looking after humankind, all right? So that's a great example. And we've got the Apple story for you as another link to that on social media that you can provide to your SMEs as well. All right. What's interesting in the Wuhan cosmetics company's example, that beauty company I told you about just a moment ago, you wouldn't believe it. Sales have increased 200% over previous year's sales. Can you imagine that in the middle of a crisis where people are staying home, not going out, not going to the beauty salons? The beauty therapists are killing it online right now in that lockdown environment. Is that not an incredible case study that we need to get out to you guys for your SMEs? It's just mind-blowing. So we'll get that out as well separately, all right? And that's come straight out of Harvard Business Review, by the way, so we've got some great credibility here for you. In terms of reducing meetings and travel, I've just explained what I'm doing. I'm not postponing meetings, I'm just running them differently, right? You suddenly discover the efficiency of your telephone and your video conferencing when you just make it the priority, all right? I do have a private client coming in today for a private session. We won't shake hands. I won't give him a hug. You know, I'm sure he'll get over it. Okay, giving employees flexibility. So, pardon me, I can cough into my hand because I'm not sick, by the way. So don't stress. Parents may have to pick up their kids leaving from school, of course, not leaving them absent in environments. Some schools have already planned and they're talking about possibly shutting later this week. Some, like Carey Grammar in Victoria, closed down for a week and they're back open again today. I don't know for how long. I don't think it's particularly wise because there's a mass transmission opportunity in public schools as there are any other high contact areas. Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre, which would be one of the most frequented high contact areas for conferences in Australia, they've publicly announced over the weekend that in line with the government benchmark set, they have cancelled indefinitely for the next few months every convention that's been booked and paid for that has sold more than 500 tickets for attendees. So that was announced over the weekend. What I don't understand is why they're not cancelling events that have got under freaking 500 attendees. What, it's okay to infect 300? It's got me stuffed. So anyway, you know, we'll be sort of tackling those sorts of idiotic examples later directly. Now, the importance of having up-to-date financial statements, all right? To make the best possible decisions, of course, the bookkeeping is going to become important, isn't it? The bookkeeping is going to become really important. That's a way that our accountants and advisors can actually get very pragmatic, very simple terms, is actually get onto the bookkeeping, understand the variations there and what's up to date and what's not, all right? And we recommend that you're encouraging clients to get their financial statements up to date. And of course, you might be the one that's actually helping them to do that if that's something they're not particularly financially literate. Now, what the Australian government is doing, all right, we'll get onto that now. Finally, we've got the 14-day homestay restrictions in place, the quarantines. One of our very own superstar accountants, Elizabeth Schul, has finally arrived overnight, or is arriving at midday today from Germany after undergoing an operation on pancreatic cancer. And she's been in quarantine. She'll be in quarantine for 2 weeks, but, you know, she's had a tough trip for the last 3 months. They're continuing to screen travellers who arrive in Australia, obviously. There's border surveillance now, and they're enhancing those measures at international air and seaports, despite what was presented on the media overnight, that there was a seaport issue. There was actually people coming through on seaports not being policed and checked, but that's now addressed. They're also delivering a $17.6 billion economic support package to encourage investment and keep people in jobs, and a $2.4 billion health package to protect all Australians, especially those vulnerable. We're going to look into the detail of that, and we'll produce progressively over the next few days more information so that you've got some tangibility around what does that actually mean. In terms of providing secure face masks and so forth, I think we may get to a point where it's wise to actually, you know, to lead by example as a country and follow in countries like Japan's footsteps when out in public in the past. But right now, it's really about the mass environments. State and territory health, you'll find that what we're seeing is on Facebook and Twitter, all state governments are actually putting reports out every day. So it's easy to stay in touch with your local environment. From the 16th of March, anyone arriving in Australia has got that self-isolation for 14 days. International cruise ships are banned from docking in Australia for at least 30 days now. All Australians are advised to reconsider their need for travel overseas at this time. Medical advice is presenting non-essential organised gatherings, obviously for 500. We don't understand why it's less than that. Tax office assistance now. On to tax office assistance. What we're saying is that there's an encouragement to list the possible impacts on your business, estimate the financial impact and develop mitigation strategies, to discuss with your staff, your key suppliers and customers what the likely impact will be on their business, and to understand what their concerns are. We will do our best to receive any commentary back from you. If you're getting some curly questions and you're not entirely sure, please send through to us those questions coming from your clients. We'll put a think tank together for you with a panel of our accountants, of course, as well. Developing a crisis budget with a worst case scenario. Okay, firstly, sales, for anyone who is not familiar with conversing online, then sales activity may drop in their business, right, in that small business. So the big issue here is we've got to encourage our business owners to innovate. We've got to encourage them to think differently. We've got to encourage them to actually ask themselves, what can I do differently today? All right. In terms of staff availability, with people likely to be subjected to restrictions at some point, their ability to work might be curtailed, but really right now that's not a big deal. Most of us have got better home internet thanks to the poor rollout of the NBN being residentially based over the SME community. You may find that they're actually just as effective on higher speed broadband from home. Developing a crisis budget. The assumption is that you may have to produce your budget. It's no longer relevant. It's very important to understand those cash burn rates for those small businesses. So a terminology we use here, and our accountants will be all over this, but if you're not working with us, you need to understand and start introducing all of your SME clients to something we call a cash burn rate. And that's just keeping, what's it cost your clients to keep their doors open? Just maintain their turnover. And where can your clients start instantly making some intelligent decisions around just reducing that cash burn rate as much as possible in a common sense way. So for example, if a cafe's got a whole bunch of staff that they're used to employing right now, they've probably got to drop their staff numbers to 25% or 20% of their original capacity. And even then, even think about having a 14-day or a 7-day hiatus and literally communicating that to their staff to go and have a break for a week and just stay healthy. A 1-week break is probably a better way to then stop, slow down, innovate, and think differently, or to run on skeleton staff in that regard. Okay, the crisis budget, if it can't make the affordable entitlements over the next 3 to 6 months, what's interesting, we've spoken to Fairwork Australia this morning about this, and Fairwork Australia have advised, and again, we'll get this content to you, they've advised that you be transparent with your employees. So if you have any financial difficulty, it's better to be upfront with the employees and maybe encourage them to actually have some unpaid leave as well. What Fair Work Australia are saying is that they acknowledge this is an extraordinary time, right? This is an extraordinary time in human history. So they're not going to encourage anyone to sue their employer through an extraordinary blip in human history, right? Fair Work's view on employment and employee communications is that they are simply saying, be transparent, commit to employees in writing that you will catch up when financially with their obligations and what their entitlements are when you can as business returns to normal. And I think what's very, very important to understand here is that this is a slowdown, it's not a shutdown. of our economy. It's a global slowdown. It's to reduce the stress on our health system, so the health system can treat people and reduce the mortality rate. That's what this is all about. Peter, I'll get you to drop over here next to me, mate, in a moment, and cough into your elbow, and just share a little bit you picked up from the tax office. You're right to come over and do that. And so I'm going to get Peter Sprekos just to jump in now. He's going to talk about some of the tax office insights he's picked up on, and then I'm going to ask some of our accountants on our panel to throw up any questions that have come to them. Thanks, Peter.
Yep, no worries. Yeah, I just saw some information come through from the ATO over the weekend that they are going to be obviously assisting with lodgement obligations and deadlines and payment plans to smooth the transition for small business. Obviously, some more information will come to light over the coming days and weeks as the looming lodgement deadlines come closer. So I'm expecting that they will be quite reasonable and practical to allow extension deadlines. I think that's more than fair and reasonable given the unique circumstances. And I believe that the similar approach with Fair Work being transparent and upfront regarding people's obligations and communicating as best you can. At the end of the day, we'll manage the process all the way through. So I'm not sure if anyone's had any specific discussions with the ATO at this stage regarding these sorts of issues, but the communications I've seen so far is that they are going to stand, as they say, shoulder to shoulder with the profession to help everyone through these difficult times.
Thanks, mate. Well done. All right, now, obviously we handpicked a panel, our best practice accountants that are part of our national program. Troy, Kerry, Simon, Rob, Laura. If any of you are ready to go, I might get Troy to kick us off. And this, what I'm encouraging you to do is to really to share the mindset on behalf of the profession that we're faced with. All right, and Chris, of course, as a small business owner, a best practice member, we might get you also to drop in a couple of minutes and just talk about any anxiety that you're feeling as a small business owner as well, because this is the stuff that, as an accounting profession, we've got to step up and deal with. Troy, are you okay to kick us off?
Yeah, no dramas. Look, I guess one of the most difficult, the biggest challenge that we've got as an accounting firm and a business owner is the perceived opinion on what we should or shouldn't be doing. Yeah. It's very difficult to be an expert in this area because everything is just so unknown. So on one hand, we're telling we need to limit or discourage people from going to public places and where there's lots of other people and so forth. But a number of our businesses across Australia are very reliant on that income stream. So I think we need to be proactive in coming up with some alternative options for them. So for instance, Cruisers Cafe, which is a local service station here, John, they've been very proactive, which that business, they've been very proactive with their social media and in coming up with some alternative shopping methods for local people. The Uber Eats thing, that's a good idea, but then then who's the Uber driver and who's the person going to be collecting those things? So there's lots and lots of fors and against. I guess the other thing that we really got to promote and be on the front foot with is in terms of panic. Everybody, and I shared with what my concerns were 2 weeks ago, and it's starting to show now. I think people just got to be responsible, and if you can avoid interstate travel and so forth, I'll put one off tomorrow. You just do it by Zoom or defer it or a wait and see approach. But I don't think we can sit back and wait and just stall our lives. We've just got to get on with it, because this thing's not going to be a month. This is likely to be 6 to 8 months. So over that time, there's going to be critical cash flow positions for a lot of our businesses, and that's going to flow through and affect everybody. So I really don't know what the best approach is. I think we've got to think before we start shooting our mouths off. There's only my thoughts, but we've got to get it right. We've got to get it consistent across our team. So, yeah, so it's not so much a wait and see. I've had plenty of time in the car over the weekend to think about how we be proactive in that area. So I'm certainly not the most guy coming off the batting rank to understand. I'm not really clear on how we can be doing that.
Okay, I'll come back. Thanks, Troy, for that. I'll address a couple of those points in just a moment. Kerry, is there any sentiment out of your client base or what's happening in Canberra, and what questions have you got?
I think that we're coming off the bushfire season as well, which, is not just Canberra, that was, most of Australia. Canberra also had the very severe hailstorms, which had a very big impact here with 20,000 cars written off and a lot of people not in a position to be able to refinance to buy a new car if they could find a new car. So we're coming off a difficult season anyway. And I think what came out of that was that we need to be very careful about how much we take in from social media. I think we're living in an environment now where we need to be on social media and see what's going on. That's where we're getting our news. It's timely, it's informative, etc. But there's also a lot of in there that we need to discard, that we shouldn't be taking on, that will have an impact on our mental health if we don't prepare ourselves and guard our mental health from what's going on out there. I watched the Prime Minister's announcements yesterday and then saw all these questions on there that looked like people that hadn't bothered to read it or listen to it and didn't know what was going on, and started perpetuating a whole lot of problems. Why aren't the schools shut? Well, the announcement had some very good reasons as to why we weren't shutting the schools, and the first reason that comes to my mind was so that the health workers could go to work, but also that it reduced transmissions and things like that. So that was covered, but there was a lot of speculation out there and blaming and scaremongering because we weren't doing what somebody else was doing, another country was doing. So I think we need to be very careful about taking on everything that's going on out there in the social media. Be alert but not alarmed. I think we also need to think, I'm old enough to remember the Y2K bug. A lot of my staff aren't, but I can remember it. And afterwards, and even still now, we still hear some people go, well, wasn't that a storm in a teacup? But in actual fact, I think it's because we were so proactive beforehand. We were prepared for it. We talked about it. We all went to conferences. We reviewed our positions and we did what we needed to do so that it became not the big problem that we could have had if we hadn't been proactive. And I think that's what we need to be doing now, is we need to be sensible about this. We need to be proactive. We need to be protecting everybody within the community. But a couple of the things that are really concerning for me is all of the casual employees. We've got a workforce that's moving towards that. And, and I commend Apple for shutting their stores, but I've got about 11 clients that work for the Apple stores and they're all casuals. So they've just lost their income for the next 30 days and I don't know how they can buy toilet paper when they can find it. And they're the things that are coming back to me is what happens now. I'm not getting that income, and that will have a flow-on effect to all businesses, because if that income's not there and they're scrounging around to pay their rent or their, to buy their toilet paper, where's the extra money to do anything extra?
Yeah, good point, Kerry. And I'm just going to address a couple of those things too. The mass hysteria, unfortunately, if 90% of Australia's population are employees as opposed to small business owners, then they're going to get sucked into when they watch the media stories about people having punch-ups over toilet paper in a supermarket, and so they join the circus by watching that, and that's dare I say a natural flow-on effect of us going back to selfish fear-based reactionary behaviour. The Y2K bug was a beautiful example because trillions of dollars were invested globally on an anticipated problem that ultimately was either well prepared for or never actually existed. Nobody knew what historical DOS-based and platform-based computers were going to do at the Y2K, and ironically, they rolled over beyond their own programming most of the time. There were a few issues, but it's a bit like this situation. I think the reality is we are going to have approximately somewhere between 7 and 14 days at a minimum where this mass hysteria is going to be probably our biggest problem in Australia. That's where there's more potential for a flow-on effect for contagion to continue, and it's also going to create a ripple effect in terms of stock supplies and so forth. So the quicker we can, as you point out, Kerry, the quicker we can communicate and reassure our clients, our business owners, that for 7 to 14 days, it's going to be pretty strange and weird. Absolutely. But this is a slow down, not a shutdown initiative. And it's not the GFC. It's going to have a sudden feeling similar to a GFC scenario, but it's actually not the case. And the fact is, we can all plan to do business as usual. We just have to do it a bit differently. And and the more we innovate, the more we lead by example, the quicker other people will follow and calm down as well. And that's really important. I've just noticed we've got Simon's on this call as well. Simon, if you've got any commentary or questions you'd like to share, let us know, mate.
I've had 2 calls already this morning, just smaller salary and wage clients, but it was about their super. I've logged on, and a friend of mine this morning, I had 500 grand there last week. Now I've only got 430. I'm going to put it into cash, was his query. And I said, just stand back, take a chill pill. It's panic. It's dropped 25 grand. It's dropped 25% in the markets and various things are happening, but just cool it for a sec, have a think about, and I had a chat with him for 10 or 15 minutes. And he said, yeah, that was a bit silly. Yeah, I said, talk to our financial planner or whatever, and I've heard doom and gloom and all this. So people are just panicking.
That's correct. Yeah. And look, it's interesting, my partner, she's, Serbian, she's survived the Bosnian War. She's actually got shrapnel in her body, fine points of it. And she talks about the fact that this country will fall into mass hysteria on the basis that we don't really know adversity, right? And I think that's the point, isn't it? We've been a very privileged nation, the lucky country for all of our lives, really. And so temporary hysteria, temporary anxiety levels are going to be there for those who are not being guided through that. They're probably the ones that are going to carry on a bit. Chris, have you got, as a small business owner in Queensland, Chris, have you had any experience or particular feelings you could share with us to give us some insights into what it's like for yourself at the moment?
Sure. I suppose what I started is about a month ago. I identified key items that I needed to keep my business going. So, things, especially items that I suspect may be partly or wholly made in China. Like pumps that we use for repairs, and we basically stocked up on things like pumps, things like metal jugs that come out of China that I need to be able to sell my equipment. So I suppose we did a bit of proactive preparation for problems with logistical supply chains in terms of products to be able to keep my business going. In terms of preparations here, I mean, we've certainly got our casual staff going and using disinfectant on all our door handles, light switches, doorknobs twice a day, first thing in the morning, first thing at night. We've got staff to no longer share computers as much as possible, just use one. So we're kind of trying to limit that there. And I suppose we've had discussions that if things slowed down more, we would look at perhaps separating our staff into teams so there's not crossover of staff. So we'd have a group of 1 people on one day and another group of people on another day.
Yeah, well done. From our point of view, it's very simple. Our office-bound team, they work at their own desks. They don't share anything. They don't need to. And, it's simple, isn't it? Washing your hands at every break whenever you're moving.
Yeah, I suppose given that, in a retail environment, we've got a computer that's down the front that, front of house people use, and we've just got to be mindful of, even though it's convenient, I need to kind of walk a bit further to go back and use my keyboard and things like that. And so, I suppose the view was that we might not be able to stop it altogether, but at least we can do some simple things right from the start in terms of, just trying to create that separation
Yeah,
between
absolutely.
people.
Yeah, and as awkward as it is for all of us in the world of small business, the reality is I don't want my mum and dad, getting infected and being at high risk, and I think this is what this is all about, is we've got to take a mature approach from a communication point of view. We'll be drafting a few things, and for anyone that wants them, the whole pack of what we've got over the next few days, by all means, just reply again to today's invitation on email saying, please include me. That's all you need to do. Just reply a second time. And we'll also make sure you get a copy of this webinar as well. But remember, we did not have a registration process this morning. So we do not know who's registered today. So don't leave it to us, okay? Make sure that you indicate that you want the information pack, and we'll get that through to you, and we'll give you the progressive information, including we're going to cut some marketing or some, public style video footage that you're also very welcome to distribute if you need that, if you want that. So make sure you indicate to us that you want to be included in that, because we do not have any recognition on, there's many, we've got I think we've got over 100 attendees today. We've probably got 150. So not aware of who you are. We didn't put a registration process, so make sure you let us know if you want that extra content. All right. Thank you so much for the contributors today. The video recording itself, again, will be available, but you've got to ask for it and do that in the email so that our team has got recognition of that. All right. Thanks again, and we look forward to giving you more updates for those who want those. And thank you very much for your participation today. Stay safe, stay calm, and step up and lead by example as a profession. Let's get those SMEs some comfort and some guidance about staying calm themselves. Have a great Monday.